and both schools are incredible, but Inspire is just, it's very unique, and that's why I appreciate it.
So what made the difference for you for caring about the environment and actually having the courage to do something? Your friend asked you to make a speech, but what else?
Well, I had, started hearing about a bunch of different things that were happening with animals, and this whole thing about like the turtles was kind of originally like everyone was like, oh, save the turtles, don't use plastic straws, and I was like, I wonder why that is. So I decided to start doing my research, and I realized that yes, it's about the turtles, but it's about so much more than the turtles. It's about all animals, it's about our lives, it's about how we're going to be affected by climate change, and how it's not just about plastic, it's about CO2, it's about, all these different things that contribute to climate change. And so that's kind of how I started, was like I realized that there was so many things wrong, and no one was really making it a priority. Everyone was like, oh, well, climate change, it's there, but we don't really need to do anything about it yet, like it's fine. And so I was just kind of like, I don't know about that, I don't know if it's fine. So I started educating myself more, learning from friends, learning from the internet, which is kind of how, like I said, it kind of got started for me. So that's when I decided that it was something that I was passionate about, was just having educated myself like through the internet and realizing that it's going to directly affect like me and my generation.
And when was that? How old were you?
Oh God, I'm not quite sure. It seems like forever. I've always kind of been I've been a vegetarian for about 4 years now, maybe more. But it kind of just started like, oh, I don't really like meat, I don't want to eat it. And then I realized that it was really good for the environment. So I guess it's been quite a while, probably 4 or 5 years that I've been like, is this really, it kind of became a priority for me in the past couple years, but probably 4 or 5 years.
And how old are you now?
I'm 15.
What's really interesting is I'm working on a book about young women climate activists, and I don't know of any other generation that starts out being an activist at 11 or 12 like we're hearing today. So, and I wonder, so you started out really young, since you're only 15. Why do you think your generation Z is able to do that?
I think that the internet has a lot to do with it. I think that spreading ideas and spreading information that you have is a lot easier now because of the internet. And I feel like it's become more acceptable for teenagers to be included in politics, when before it was kind of like, I mean, at first it was men, it was just men, and then it was, oh, well, maybe adult women can join in, and then it was like, oh, well, 18-year-olds, they vote, so maybe we should start including them in some of the ideas that we bring forward. And I think throughout time it's kind of just become more acceptable for teenagers to have an opinion, which I, of course, love, because I think that the laws that the adults vote on have everything to do with us, and we can't vote. So that's why I think is people are starting to realize that the laws that are being put in place do affect teenagers, and that they should be able to have a say.
What's really interesting to me about Generation Y and Z is they tend to be really egalitarian, not care about people's skin color or sexual preference or whatever. And I think that's fairly unique about Generations Y and Z. And I wonder if that doesn't kind of play into providing kind of a foundation for activism.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. It allows us to kind of all work together on aspects of things, instead of just being like, oh, well, this is just for this group of people and this is just for this group of people, and you can only have an opinion on this because you're like this, I think that definitely has a lot to do with it, because it's kind of, we're not seeing, like you said, people's skin color, sexual orientation, gender, whatever it may be. We're kind of just like, hey, you agree with us? Cool, like, let's do something about it. It's a lot more direct, I think.
Right, and there's more options. Like, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her, they, them.
Okay.
Kind of things.
And what about your family background? Do your parents think, yay, CC, or they be careful, or what's your parents?
So my parents are mostly my dad is very politically active. My mom is too, of course. And yeah, they love it. They really they like it. They just are, of course, like, be careful, but because it does get a little bit dangerous for, I think, some of the protests and stuff that we do and some of the protests that I could potentially do. They're kind of like, hey, don't get arrested, please. But yeah, they love it. They love it. They're really proud of me, which feels nice.
Do you have siblings?
Yes, I do. I have an 8-year-old brother, and he feels the same way about Trump as I do, which is great.
Right. And then where are you headed in terms of college? Which would be your ideal?
I'm going to go to Butte for a couple of years, just because I feel like since we have a community college in our town that allows us to have 2 free years, why not get my prereqs done there? And then I'm not quite sure. And then from there, I guess we'll see.
What would you major in now if you were going to pick your college major?
That's kind of hard. There's 2 very different directions. I would want to probably at least minor in political science, and then I would probably major in either criminal justice or film, which are 2 very different things,
Yeah.
but 2 things that I'm very interested in.
And then do you see them being applicable to environmental activism, or are they separate?
Yeah, I do. I think that if I were to make movies, I would probably make them political documentaries, because I think that's a good way to kind of incorporate there are a lot of things that I'm passionate about. So yeah, I would probably kind of mix them together a little bit.
Are you making videos now?
Yes, I am. I was just talking to Abe about how I have a competition on Saturday.
The reason I'm asking is I have a whole lot of videos of interviews with young climate activists on my YouTube channel, and it wouldn't be hard to put together an interesting documentary if you ever need a project.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And now I'm as I said, I'm doing this book about young women globally who are activists in the climate movement. So I have someone from Stockholm, from near Hamburg, 2 young women from Turkey, and a girl from Georgia. And I'm just getting started, so it's pretty juicy.
Nice.
Okay, Abe, you're at Butte.
Yes, I'm at Butte. Do all the microphones work?
Pardon?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. So tell us what you're majoring in, where you're headed, how you got involved in climate activism.
So it's my last year at Butte, and I am a political science and sociology major. And I got involved with Sunrise at the beginning of 2019, right after it started, a month after it started. And I became aware of climate change, at least, excuse me, fundamentally about it, through Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything book that I read right after high school. But it wasn't until 2019 that I got involved, actually taking action into helping, I guess, mitigate the climate crisis. I lead a team on Sunrise Chico, Team Jedi, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And this is my first time getting involved in community organizing and advocating. So it's one of my first roles in leadership, and the reason I did it was because I'm in the environmental fight because of social justice. So I think that the climate crisis is inherently intersectional, so it can help alleviate a lot of the social chaos we're living in. So I decided.
Do you want to give an example of that? Do you mean like poor people around the world are more harmed by climate change?
Poor people of color, right? Indigenous communities, and one of the reasons why I also just really liked Sunrise and the space it provides. It's just very welcoming with like all backgrounds and all walks of life, really. I think the main thing about Sunrise, it's storytelling, so it allows individuals to talk about how the climate crisis affects them, because it all affects us very differently, right? And it takes into consideration different identities and different sexualities and people of color as well, putting those individuals in the forefront, because they're the ones who are mostly affected by the crisis and the ones least causing impact. to
You know,
society.
the young people who filed suit against the feds for they tell their stories, and I think that's their strong point. You know, I live in Louisiana, my house was flooded, and I live in this area, and I'm a Native American, and my tribal lands are being inundated by the ocean or something.
Right.
So what's an example that you might tell?
Well, one of the things I really focus on with through Sunrise is how climate justice is trans justice, and helping people see how those where those connections are, because not everyone can see them. So I've held workshops on it. I've also focused on a lot of the ramifications we're living with because are caused by capitalism. So I guess ultimately a way to really fundamentally try to solve this is to really reform our structures, because part of it is capitalism. Like an example I always talk about is plastic straws, right? They're banned, okay, that's good, but now we're moving on to metal straws, but they're still being mass produced. So they're still going to end up in the trash somehow. So they're going to end up in the ocean, they're going to end up in landfills, even though, we can't really fathom right now, metal doesn't belong in trash, right? But people will do it. So it's really important to focus on not just the economic side, but also the societal side of the crisis.
What do you mean trans issues and climate issues interrelate?
So it relates in many different aspects. Like actually when the campfire happened, a lot of individuals, well not a lot, but some individuals ended up going to Stonewall, the resource center in town, because their documents got burned, right? And you can say, oh, they can just replace those documents, but they experience a lot of microaggressions and a lot of discrimination throughout that process as well. If we talk about housing, a lot of those individuals, trans individuals, queer individuals, are homeless as well. They're predominantly homeless. So housing is an aspect that can be solved through the mitigating the climate crisis and through the Green New Deal. So the Green New Deal is a resolution, right? And AOC not too long ago introduced an actual bill that's behind the Green New Deal, which was public housing. So that's one way that you can talk about trans justice being connected to the environment.
Mm. And where are you headed after Butte?
I'm going to Chico State.
And what will you major in? Poli-sci?
Yeah, it's sociology, double majoring. Yeah.
And what does your family think about your activism?
Well, my mom's a little worried just about safety, but other than that, I mean, she doesn't necessarily fully grasp what I'm doing, but she supports it. But I think the only aspect is safetiness. She worries about that.
You know, what's been amazing to me is to learn how vicious bullying can be on the cyber aspect of things.
Right,
People get
yeah.
really nasty. Have any of you gotten that kind of feedback?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Let's come back to that, because that's important. So, Abe, anything else in terms of a personal story that you would tell if you were in a group about why this relates to me? Because you said storytelling is a big tactic.
Well, I went to the Sunrise National team. They organized summits across the country, and a couple of us from our hub attended the West Regional one that was held in Berkeley. And someone from the national team said something that stuck with me, and he said that he doesn't, when it comes to climate change and the climate crisis, he doesn't necessarily care about the environment, but he cares about people. Therefore, he cares about the environment. So I like seeing it that way, and I think ultimately I'm in the social justice fight, and that's why I decided to join the environmental movement. And I think that's one of the big differences, at least from now to before. The environmental movement has recognized intersectionality, right? Unfortunately, it's known as a white-centric movement, but it's not that. There's people from
I don't
all
think it
walks
is. Yeah, a lot of the
Right.
leaders are
Yeah.
people of color.
Yeah, but it gets interpreted or depicted in certain ways sometimes. But I think that's a big difference now, recognizing that and
Yeah.
seeing.
Do you mind saying how old you are and what pronouns you like?
Yes, I am 22, about to be 23 at the end of this month, and thank you. And I use they, them pronouns.
Okay.
Thank you.
And could you say a word about non-binary attitudes for people who are listening who don't know what that is?
Yeah, so just, quick lesson. So non-binary individuals live outside of like the binary construct that we've traditionally known, which
Of
is
male,
male,
female.
female, and masculine or feminine, right? So non-binary individuals don't identify as male or female, or it's more of a combination of both. Some days it's more masculine, some days it's more feminine.
It's called androgyny.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was the word that we used before. But yeah, essentially, not all non-binary people use they/them pronouns, but some of them do, and um, gender and sex are not the same thing. It's really important to know that. So non-binary is identity, right? And then something like gay or bi is sexuality. So I think that's like the biggest thing I want to.
So you could be, say, a homosexual man who was considered himself male, masculine. So that they're separate issues.
They're separate, yeah. So
Yeah.
masculinity and like their sexuality are different, yeah.
Also, we should say a word about the word hub. And the Sunrise works with about 300 hubs around the U.S., which I guess you could call chapters.
Mhm.
And and Steve Marquardt started the hub in Chico.
Yes.
And how does it work in terms of organizational structure? Is there like a president and a vice president and a secretary, or do people try to be horizontal?
I would say we would try to be horizontal. We break out into teams, so there's team leads. Stephen is the main coordinator, and then it breaks out into the Jedi team, there's a culture team, there's a social media team, which is just Brittany. She handles the social media of the hub. So we try to be more circular than like hierarchical.
Mm-hmm. We'll come back to organizing because I
Yeah.
think that's important. So let's introduce Josh. What are you studying?
So my name's Jacob, and I'll
Jacob.
just start. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am a senior at Chico State right now, studying agriculture. And I think the question was around how we got involved in the environmental movement. So I'm 23 years old. I think something that anyone who is, if we're going generationally, but like millennial and the like latter generations, can really relate to the fact that environment has always been important in some shape or form. We've always been considering the environment, or it's always been talked about. To what capacity, is something that can be argued, but it's always been in my realm of thought, but I was never really aware of the climate emergency until I got to Chico State. I actually took a class at Chico State called Food Forever. It's in the College of Ag, but anyone can take it, and it just studies food security, and it ties together like the economics of agriculture with also like social issues and stuff like that, and like micronutrient deficiencies. It gets into a lot of good detail, but that's where I was really enlightened to the climate emergency, and where I realized that this was something where my privilege had been a blindfold, and I wasn't able to see this issue. And then, of course, or I guess not of course, but personally, after the election of Mr. Donald Trump, I became really invigorated. I just was really passionate, and I was just like, to see someone, I mean, I don't want to veer too far away from the climate emergency, but to see someone who was on stage.
Connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, well, to
Absolutely.
see someone on stage, not just talking about the climate that way, but about other living beings that way is something that made me want to get up and not just sit on Twitter and complain.
All right, he doesn't like dogs.
And so, and as I'm at the end of the millennial group, I guess, but as someone who, I have an older sister too who's a millennial, it's like I see those people just becoming so desensitized to it, and they can sit and complain, but where's the action, which is something that Gen X and Gen Z has really been, and Y and stuff has been,
Y and millennial are the same.
Yeah, sorry.
And then there's Z.
Z. That's something that I've seen, like, my younger sister, who's incredibly active, and it's really inspiring. And then, of course, the campfire here in Butte County. I was here before, during, and after the campfire, and I worked at Starbucks at the time. And my store had the biggest lobby, and we were serving as kind of a gathering place for victims. And I kind of get upset thinking about it. It was some of the, like, hardest days being in that lobby, listening to people's stories, and that's something that just really got me excited to act. I saw it happen in my hometown, and that was something that was really tangible for me to say, okay, this impacts me. I can talk about it, I can read about it, but it's time to be about it, to walk the walk. And so those were kind of the things that led me to wanting to become more climate active.
And as you went through school, did teachers talk about the environmental crisis? Was it part of the curriculum?
When I got to college, yes, absolutely.
But I mean before.
Before, yes, but it was more like, oh, recycle your plastic or recycle your paper. It wasn't, and we talk about this in the Hub a lot, is teaching like it's a climate emergency. They weren't. They were talking about being environmentally friendly, not the trajectory that we were on in this climate emergency for ecosystem collapse and mass extinctions.
I think we have to talk about Trump, because I just read that he's trying to make it so that any environmental impact report done through the feds doesn't include climate change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think when talking about Trump too, it's really important to realize, like, yeah, what he's done in office will have impacts that will last decades.
Yes.
But he's in office for hopefully only 4 years, potentially 8.
Okay.
And I mean, as climate activists, we don't have term limits. We can be active our entire lives. We can take not every opportunity, because we have to work, we have to go to school, but being imperfectly active, just taking every opportunity we can to go out and fight the fight and battle for our climate.
Mm-hmm. And your parents think what you do is cool, Jacob?
If I'm being totally honest, my dad, I haven't confirmed this with him, but I truly believe he voted for Donald Trump in the last election, and he watches Fox News, and we disagree. I would say he's a climate denier. He's very open-minded. We can have very open discussions. He listens, but he doesn't, it's kind of in one ear out.
What doesn't he get? I mean, there's facts.
So, as someone who studied agriculture, the climate is always changing. And, that's something that people can disagree about, absolutely. But what you can't disagree about is that it's accelerated by human action. And so he likes to argue that, well, the climate's changing, it's always been changing, like this is just the way it is. And that's where I like to point to the intersectionality of the climate movement, is that, yeah, it's changing, but there's people who can't protect themselves from that change, and it's the job of the government and of the people to support those misrepresented groups, the trans community, the people of color, and stuff like that. And so for him, he'd rather just kind of roll over and let it happen. My younger sister and I are of a different mindset. We're out participating whenever we can.
The UN just published a group of international scientists who all said, no, this is human-made, it's escalating, it's not a natural phenomenon, so the science is out there.
To me, it's crazy.
Yeah.
To me, I'm just like, for you to deny 300 plus science, I mean, at this point, 300 is just that report. I mean, we're talking about a majority of the science community. If you're denying that at that point, to me, it's absurd. And that's something where when I'm getting backlash from people, and when I'm like kind of interacting with climate deniers, at some point I have to say, I've done enough, like, everyone's going to have their aha moment about the climate change at some point, because reality is the climate's changing for the worse. And so people are going to see that. I figure if my dad was here during the campfire with me, maybe he might have a different idea.
Did you come from a ag family, or what made you go into ag?
I participated in the Future Farmers of America, formerly known as now called FFA. I took on more of a leadership role, and I participated in something. I found this passion for agriculture, for food production, and for plants, mostly just plants. I'm kind of a nerd about plants. But I got to participate my senior year in what's called the Sacramento Leadership Experience, SLE. It's something that the FFA, California FFA, partners with the Capitol on, and we got to serve as mock legislators for 5 days in the Capitol, acting like legislators. And that was something for me where it was my senior year. I was starting to become aware of this climate movement, and that aspect of participation really was like what kind of pushed me into this. I can do something about this. Like, I'm not just some kid, like, and even if I was just a kid, my voice matters too, because these laws affect me, and policy that doesn't accept and try to mitigate the effects of climate change like I said, impacts everybody.
I know the Parkland students, the people who went through the school shooting are working really hard to get young people to register to vote, and I wonder if Sunrise is doing that too.
Yeah, so actually, I think it's the Monday before Chico State goes back into session. A handful of us are going to be tackling some voter registration. We're looking at areas that are populated by students and by some younger people, and getting them not just registered to vote, but letting them know that March 3rd is a primary and that you should vote. So yeah, we're trying our best, and just trying to make people aware of voting dates and that they can register to vote.
It's interesting that states like Texas and Georgia are trying to make it really hard for students to vote. So students around the country are going to have to really be vigilant about voting.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Kay, tell us about how you got enlightened.
Well, I'm not enlightened yet, but I'm working on it. Well, I'm the senior of the group. I'm 71. I got involved in activism in 1968 because of the Vietnam War. So I started off as a war activist, and then in 1980 I became an environmentalist as well. And that was because I was a property manager in San Francisco, and I had moved from Minnesota, and we were recycling in Minnesota, and they weren't in California yet, and I thought that was very strange.
How
so
interesting.
as each building that I managed, we turned it into a recycling facility as well, and ended up doing some of the first rooftop solar installations on the properties that I was managing, and we ended up growing food on the roofs of some of the nonprofits that I managed as well. And so it's been a long, slow involvement for me, and no one is happier than me because of Sunrise. Because when you've been plugging away for 40 years and then this new wonderful energy comes in, and I was told by someone that the younger people's DNA is actually more evolved than ours, and I looked it up, and it's true. And
Your DNA doesn't change that fast.
It doesn't change that fast, but just like the climate, it's accelerating because needs must. And I looked it up. Check it out. It's really interesting. So anyway, because they don't have to fight a lot of the fights that we had to fight about racism and gender equality and all the things that we had to spend decades achieving. You're starting off. Fortunately, we all get to stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us. But it's been a long continuum for me. But I was involved more nationally and statewide than locally. But when I moved to Chico, I volunteered and worked for Bernie Sanders, and still do, and he was a hero of mine for 30 years, so it's my vote and all my energy that I have left over. And of course, the Green New Deal, he's written the best plan of it so far, and, works with AOC, and I really believe it's going to happen.
We might have a listener who doesn't know who AOC is.
AOC is Alexandria
Ortiz.
Ocasio-Cortez. We're so used to saying AOC, I forgot what it stands
She's
for.
a congresswoman
But yeah,
from the Bronx.
She's the one that when Sunrise did their first protest inside of Nancy Pelosi's office, AOC came in and really made it her cause too, and she's probably the best spokesperson other than all of the the leaders.
I think she's 28, maybe.
She was 30.
She's 30.
Yeah. She's the youngest member of Congress. So she got elected when she was 29, and that made her the youngest by 1 year. Yeah, so anyway, I also worked on, locally I started working on frack-free Butte County, who I got involved with because of working for Bernie. And Dave Garcia is my local mentor, and he got me involved in that. And, we passed our frack-free resolution, Measure E, in 2016 during the primaries, and with 62% of the vote in a conservative county.
That's amazing.
That gives you a little impetus to keep going. So then,
was anybody wanting to frack in Butte County?
well, we aren't on a shale base, but they are fracking in the counties around us. So it's all on our borderline. And then we also have another thing, which is that, I think it's called Gray Lodge. There's a huge storage, fossil fuel storage facility there, right next to the wildlife refuge. So that was a big concern of ours too. But it showed me that locally, man, you can really get some things done, so that really inspired me. And I met Stephen Marquardt at the Women's March last year. And we bonded right away. I feel like I'm his grandmother now. But
Sweet.
it feels to me like he was dropped from heaven to help, keep the
Santa
energy
Barbara.
up and going. Yeah, well, he's from Oceanside originally. But, so the next day after the Women's March, Chico 350 was holding a meeting, our monthly meeting, and he came, and then he held the first sunrise gathering at his place, and all the 350 people went, and then he joined our 350 steering council as well. And so, when I actually broke my ankle last May, he came and stayed with me and took care of me the first week. So
he's a good grandson.
this is a really special being amongst us, and he attracts like, and he's a very magnetic soul, and an old soul in a young body. But so we work very closely. We hold most of our big events together.
350 and Sunrise.
350 and Sunrise, and we're both very, very active, and I agree with Abe that, it's the intersectionality that's in the Women's March, that's in the Sunrise, it's also in the 350 movement. And, 350 has been around for a long time, since about 1984, something like that. So what we did last year, Stephen and I and both of our respective organizations, we were able to get the Declaration of Climate Emergency passed at the City Council. We were able to get the Sustainability Task Force, which was just an ad hoc volunteer group, to become a fully budgeted and staffed Climate Action Commission. And we also had a voice in, and hopefully some import in getting the CCA established and growing, and we spoke up for it. We always go to the City Council when there's environmental issues, and these guys show up in numbers, which is
It makes a big difference.
lifts my heart.
Yeah.
And I know the city has really paid attention. And then I got a grant for the Rise for Climate Jobs and Justice from 350 in 2018, and we took a busload down to San Francisco, and 30,000 strong, we marched in the streets. And then I got a grant from 350 this past year to put on the climate strike. So everyone thinks that Sunrise did that on their own, but I actually had a lot to do with it. Paid for organized all of the logistics of it and paid for it. But because I'm smart in my old age, I put them on stage.
We should kind of outline the Green New Deal, because that's now the focus of Sunrise and probably all the environmental groups. And then, by the way, do you agree that the biggest ones nationally are 350, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, and then Sunrise is growing. But who wants to explain to us exactly what's in the Green New Deal?
And also Extinction Rebellion is coming on strong.
Oh, in the U.S. For people who don't know, it started in London in just like last fall, and then hundreds of thousands of people joined.
2 years ago, yeah.
2 years ago.
Mhm.
Thanks, Mary Kay.
Yeah.
So I didn't know there were Extinction Rebellion groups in the U.S.
There are,
Oh,
and growing.
interesting.
Yeah, and Chico's going to be starting a chapter soon.
Oh.
They're actually in the process of starting a chapter. We're just,
And how would they differentiate themselves from Sunrise or Greenpeace or any other group?
well, I would say they're the most disruptive of the groups. I mean, we have trained in nonviolence direct action as well. We've sponsored some teachings in that and so forth, but they actually just get out there and put their bodies on the line, and they are a real inspiration, and we're going to be doing a lot more along those lines, along their lines, yeah.
Do you think that's a good strategy to have different groups in a small area, or is it just like a fertile good thing?
Well, it's kind of like art, everyone's attracted to something different. And so I think, the same with finding like a spiritual teacher or something. First you find out who's out there and who you like and what draws you and appeals to you, and then you join that group. But the whole difference in all of the intersectional movements is it doesn't matter now if you're in an environmental club or if you're in Black Lives Matter or if you're,
Women's
working
March.
on housing or homeless. We're all in this together, and that's the approach that we're taking, and we want every single club in Chico to be with us, Every organization around the world, this is a world problem.
Jacob, did you find it for us, the Green New Deal?
I did actually.
Okay.
And I felt like we could share at least Chico's Green New Deal.
Oh, good.
Because like Mary Kay had mentioned, like people is power and make change locally. And so Chico, if you guys don't know, it was introduced by the mayor and the deputy mayor.
Alex Brown and Carl Lowry.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it was in response, obviously, to the federal Green New Deal, and their Green New Deal, which you can also find online. It's a little tricky, but I always go through Sunrise's, Chico Sunrise's website, and they have it linked up, but they highlighted 7 items in their plan. And for the most part, like the federal one, it's more of just like a roadmap for what different pieces of legislation will accomplish. And it's to 1, maximize clean energy opportunities, 2, support a safe and sustainable local food supply, 3, create good local green jobs, 4, develop housing that people and the planet can afford, 5, invest in low-income communities, 6, reuse water, reduce waste, and 7, transition to clean 21st century transportation, which they don't include but is public transportation.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
That's so exciting. Please,
And
people,
there is some
vote somebody
Big
progressive.
news today, too. Sunrise endorsed,
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie, yeah. So did MoveOn.org.
and so did Josh Fox, the
Mhm.
the father of the anti-fracking movement.
Aha. If you're just joining us, you're listening to KZFR FM 90.1. And Ask Dr. Gale is made possible by the generous contributions of KZFR supporters and John Burge, an experienced certified public accountant proud to support community radio. John offers a professional tax prep and is current with the new 2020 tax laws and offers e-filing at 17 Williamsburg Lane in the Stonebridge Professional Village. John Burge can be reached at 342-3680 and at johnburgecpa.com. And Burge is spelled B-U-R-G-E. Ask Dr. Gale is also brought to you by Signs and Graphic Design. Your sign is your image, and Signs and Graphic Design takes pride in making you look your best. So you wear a sign. front and back. What do you call those sandwich boards? To look your best. With over 25 years in the architectural sign industry, Signs and Graphic Design is dedicated to creating signage that works. Make your sign count by visiting signsofchico.com or call 343-2543, where they love Chico and they love signs. The Ask Dr. Gale show on February 13th will be about lawyers. It's a panel of lawyers talking about why they became lawyers and what they can do that's progressive and helpful. So it'll be an interesting panel. And then I want to remind people that all the shows that I do are videotaped, and they are on my YouTube channel, along with interviews with a lot of climate activists and young activists. So let's talk about tactics. If we want to make social change, what works? Like, as an example, I found that local organizing, what helps is offering food and music. It gets people out there. But in a more profound sense, how do we make a social movement work? Like the civil rights movement, or the women's movement have made really profound changes. What can we learn from them? You want to take that, Cece?
Yeah, sure. Or I'd love to share it, but I just want to talk for my demographic in particular, which is high school students. What I have seen that works is just kind of, so I have a club. It's called Politically Active Teens at Inspire.
Did you start it?
Yes, me and my friend Sage started it. And so something like that where it's kind of what I've noticed is like when I say like, even if you don't agree with us and you don't agree with what I have to say, please just come and listen. And I've noticed that, you know, whether that's because they actually want to come and listen or they don't want to be called out for not coming and listening is a different story, but I've noticed that works a lot. So my club is just is all sides, everyone. If you are not politically active yet and you want to become politically active, if you're extremely politically active and have very dead set opinions about things, our goal is to just be able to get people together and talk about what works and what doesn't, and what you think about and what you agree with and what you don't. And so, like I said, what I've noticed is kind of just being like, just come out and say hi and listen.
A personal one-to-one contact.
Yeah, and just
invitation.
and just saying like, well, I'm open to listening to you, please be open to listening to me. And it's just kind of in my opinion, I just have to ask. I just have to say, how do you feel about this? And of course, there's not people aren't gonna not all people who disagree with me are gonna come out and want to listen to what I have to say. But like I said, what I've noticed is just being like, what do you have to lose?
Face.
What do you have to lose coming
Talking.
and listening?
And that's what politicians say, going door to door. Hello, my face, your face, my hand, your hand. That's what works. So about how many people are there in the club?
So we're just getting started. So I'd say that we probably have like 10 or 15 recurring members. We've only had like 5 or 6 meetings so far. But yeah, we have a lot of people who kind of like come in and just listen for a little while, decide if it's for them. And like I said, we're just getting started, so there's not a whole lot. But
what percentage are female? Or male or non-binary?
A lot are female. And I think that has a lot to do with why there's so many female activists rather than a lesser percentage of male or non-binary activists. Well, there's a lot of non-binary activists in the queer community, but specifically for climate action, when I was telling my mom this morning, she was like, why do you think that there's so many female activists for climate change? And I think that it's easier to kind of play to a female's sense of like urgency and sense of like emotion for it. Is my opinion on it, is it's easier to just be like, this is an emergency and you need to believe it now, or you need to help us now because it can't wait. So that was just kind of my take on it, was that it's easier to kind of play to that emotional side, whereas with males they're very cemented into a specific role, being like, well, I only believe fact all the time and I only believe what I've heard, and just kind of you know, that sort of role that they're cemented into, and not being able to feel like they can come out and just listen, and they don't have to agree. They can just hear us and listen. And so that was kind of what I was talking about with my mom this afternoon, was why I think there's so many female activists in the environmental fight.
What I've also heard from the interviews that I'm doing for my book is that at least for adolescents, it's not cool for a guy to be an activist.
Absolutely.
It changes in the 20s, I think. But what's cool is being an athlete, being in a band, smoking, drinking. What would you say is cool for high school students now?
Well, since I go to Inspire, we're an art school, so a lot of it is mostly, you know, just being in a band, being that big tough guy, like whatever, which is interesting because I have a lot of activist friends who are male, but they are less likely to come out and actually go out of their way
Go public.
go public, for fear of probably scrutiny, I think, thinking like, oh, really, you're an activist now? Really, that's what we're doing? I've heard that a lot.
Wow.
It's like, really, you're just becoming a feminist, like all this stuff. And I think what's
Which means
important
uncool.
is kind of just breaking down that idea of like feminists are just women, which is absolutely not true. And that activists are just women, which is not true.
What percentage of active Sunrise people are female, or male, or non-binary? When you go to a hub meeting?
I think the majority are women.